There we go. Hallelujah. Again, we are in Parashat Pinchas. It is in Numbers, chapter 25, reading verses 10 and 11. וידבר אדוני אל משה לאמור פנקס, בן אלעזר בן אהרון הכהן, ישיב את קמתי מעל בני ישראל, וכנוס את קנתי בתוכם, ולא קילתי את בני ישראל בקנתי. Then Adonai spoke to Moshe, saying, Pinchas, son of Eleazar, son of Aharon, the Kohen, who has turned away my anger from Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, because he was very zealous for me among them, so that I did not put an end to Bnei Israel in my zeal. Have you ever got really uber excited before? Did something that was unexpected. Today we delve into a pivotal portion of the Torah, Parashat Pinchas. This passage is, I think, a rich tapestry of divine zeal, of covenant faithfulness, the sanctity of vows and offerings, woven together in this narrative of Pinchas, the census of a new generation and the legislation of offerings and vows. Our journey will blend traditional Jewish insight, I think, with some Messianic interpretations. I think honoring our roots while reflecting our faith in Messiah Yeshua. And as the parsha opens, we immediately begin reading about covenant faithfulness. What an undulating path Israel seems to be traveling. The highs and followed by the low of lows. Mountaintops to valleys and back again. From holy obedience to casual irreverence. From proper worship of the Almighty to great and high-handed sins against Him. No sooner did we finish the episode of Balaam pronouncing glorious and victorious prophetic blessings over Israel that bears no guilt in God's eyes, and an affirmation of their unique and separate identity with the Lord from all the nations. Then we find Hebrews cavorting, cajoling with the enemy, reveling with their gods, and partying with their women. We might ask ourselves at this point, don't they ever learn? How many deaths at God's own hand must they suffer before they fully submit to His lordship? Well, on one hand, we see the infamous description of Hebrews being a stiff-necked people. It's being developed. But on the other hand, we see that less a matter of short memories and more of a matter of a different group people have been learning the same lessons that have been previously taught to their forefathers, their elders. But now God's curse upon Israel, the people who came out of Egypt, who had attained the age of 20 by the time they had left, were still alive, all except for Joshua and Caleb. So while the first Exodus generation had suffered much as a result of their rebellions, this new generation was either not yet born or had failed to absorb the lessons that were meted out by their forefathers. This may also answer why this thing's not clicking. The often asked question, why does Numbers and later Deuteronomy tend to repeat so much of what's already been given to Israel and even to us today? Why do we have all this repeated in the book of Exodus, from the book of Exodus? The reason is really no different to how it's always been with all of mankind. We never seem to learn from history, from our mistakes. It is said that a wise man learns from his mistakes, but a wiser man learns from the mistakes of others. This new generation of Israelites didn't take Adonai seriously, and so we're about to pay a terrible price. Verse 1, it tells us that Israel was probably still at the same encampment that they were when Balaam and Balak took 3 different hilltops, gazing at this vast horde of Hebrews, with King Balak trying to convince the Gentile sorcerer Balaam to curse Israel for him. And the name of this place was Shittim, which literally means an acacia tree. So let's begin by understanding that it is highly unlikely that at the moment this was occurring, Israel had no idea of the shenanigans that had occurred with Balaam and Balak. That is to say that the folks of Israel had no idea at the time it was happening that King Balak was working furiously to have Israel spiritually cursed. In fact, it is a tradition that Balaam suggested as he was leaving to go back to Mesopotamia, that as an alternative means of defeating Israel, that King Balak infiltrate Israel with his people and their people by befriending them in an attempt to slowly lure them away from Adonai. The immediate goal would be to get Israel to worship the gods of Moab, because this was a culturally typical sign of allegiance and respect. Sure enough, we're told that the men, started messing around with those Moabite women. Almost for sure these were the younger and more eligible men that might have also included a few of the middle-aged men who felt free to comport with women other than their wives. Further, it is said at the beginning of verse 2 that the setting for this prostitution, this whoring, was to sacrifice to the gods of Moab. What is happening here is a festival to Baal, or he was officially called during this era the Transjordan region of Chemosh. And this whoring was also likely revolved around the pagan practice for religious prostitution that was common amongst most of the mystery religions of this time. Chemosh who is here called Baal Peor, or better, the Baal of Peor, the god, was one of the several gods that involved the fertility. So sacred sex was at the core of every celebration in honor of this fertility god or goddess. Therefore, we have 2 major violations of God's commandments being at play. Israel was coveting other gods other than Adonai, and they were committing fornication, and in some cases adultery, with all these foreign women. This could all be lumped into the category of idolatry. At first, the actions of the people of Israel interacting with the Moabites would have seemed welcome and natural. It would have seemed peaceful, maybe even respectful, and neighborly on both sides of the fence. Moab was not the home of savages who sought to do terrible things to all who came near them. They were just pretty much regular folks. For the young men of Israel to spy on some pretty girls from another and a different, probably appealing culture was something to be humanly expected. Moab worshipped various gods, including Baal as their chief god. It was not Israel's calling to convert foreigners as they journeyed towards the promised land. And they certainly felt no obligation to attempt it. So being people, Israel showed some respect for those Moabite beliefs, even if they didn't agree with them. First mistake. There's no such thing as coexist. Lose that sticker. How else would they be able to get along in a civil manner unless they behave nicely? Yet, never in the Holy Scriptures are God's followers ever taught to show respect to false gods and cultures. Not even mess with means to peaceful coexistence. And the reason why is demonstrated right here in the first two verses of Numbers chapter 25. Invariably, the respect and the tolerance of pagan ways and their gods turns to the adopting of some of those ways and the watering down or the perversion of the ways of our God. There's a southern saying, you can't hang out with dogs unless you spend it and not expect to get fleas. You get up with fleas. God calls this whoring because for him it's idolatry, practiced by his set-apart people being unfaithful. Now, whoring doesn't necessarily mean that the Israelite men were going after Moabite prostitutes, though that's probably what they did. Rather, it means that they were having closer and closer relationships with these foreign people whose culture was about honoring other gods. And the men of Israel were automatically being unfaithful to God by just doing that. There in Moab, the deadly spiral of apostasy and idolatry began subtly and unnoticed, with Hebrew men merely forming acquaintances with the Moabites and the Moabite women. Pretty soon, they say in verse 2, the Moabite women did what was natural. They invited the new Hebrew friends, we'll call them friends, to join them in their national festival seasons. And honest and sincere to be social, right? And of course, just as it was with Israel, all the Moabite festival occasions revolved around one of their gods or another. Many within Israel had no qualms with doing that and attending some of these Moabite religious festivals and celebrations. And they saw no conflict with that versus their own worship of Adonai. For them, they were only forging peaceful relationships with the Moabites. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 4, it tells us, for if someone comes and proclaims another Yeshua, whom we did not proclaim, or if that someone you received receives a different spirit that you did not receive, or a different good news that you did not accept, you put up with that well enough. God's reaction to these kinds of human efforts and misuse of commandments is well stated in Numbers 25, verse 3. The anger of Adonai blazed up against Israel. So let's continue with Pinchas, whose zealous act of stopping a plague amongst the Israelites reveals much about divine justice and a covenant integrity. That word kinah, K-I-N-A-H, speaks of a fervent, protective jealousy, similar to God's own nature. This is not mere aggression, but a deep commitment to safeguarding the holiness of God's people. Rabbi Shlomo Yitzhaki, known as Rashi, comments that Pinchas' zeal was a reflection of God's own passionate love for his people. A reminder that our zeal should be rooted in love and not in anger or in vengeance. As followers of Yeshua, we see echoes of this zeal in his righteousness and his indignation at the temple that purity demands in worship. Parashat Pinchas is one of the most profound portions in the Torah because it addresses four major themes: holy zeal and covenant faithfulness, the everlasting priesthood, and a transfer of leadership from Moshe to Yehoshua, Joshua, and the inheritance in the covenant order. Almost immediately, the portion begins after one of the darkest moments in Israel's wilderness journey. 24,000 Israelites have died because of the sin at Baal Peor. Then a single man, Pinchas, acts decisively. The Lord responds with extraordinary words. Pinchas, son of Eleazar, son of Aharon the priest, has turned my wrath away from the children of Israel. From a Messianic perspective, this portion points us back toward the priesthood of Aharon and forward to a greater priesthood of Messiah Yeshua. Numbers chapter 25, verse 10, it tells us, V'yedaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, like almost all of our portions begin. And Adonai spoke to Moshe, saying, there's a direct divine speech happening here. The sages often note that whenever Torah introduces a new divine declaration after a judgment, it signifies that mercy is about to emerge from judgment. The plague has stopped. Justice has been satisfied. Now, covenant restoration can begin. Rashi, he comments that God publicly praises Pinchas because many of the Israelites were questioning his actions, even his lineage. Adonai, therefore, vindicates him, and principle emerges. God often defends those who defend his covenant. Pinchas has turned away my wrath, it says in verse 11. The Hebrew verb is hishiv et kamati, turned back my fury. Now Pinchas becomes a human instrument of covenant restoration. In regard to Jewish understanding, the sages are careful. Pinchas is not praised merely for his violence. He is praised because his action rose from his covenant faithfulness rather than from personal anger. The Talmud teaches he acted for the sake of heaven. The issue was not merely immorality, it was covenant betrayal. Israel was joining itself to idolatry. Now, many Christians and Jews misunderstand zeal. Biblical zeal is not fanaticism. It's not going off your hinges. Biblical zeal is a love for God's holiness. Yeshua himself displayed zeal. Melech David prophesied, zeal for your house, Adonai, has consumed me. We read that in Psalm 69, verse 9. This verse is applied directly to Yeshua in the gospel accounts. They came to Jerusalem and entered the east side of the city through the sheep gate. And it seemed that Yeshua knew exactly where he was going. As he went, his hand touched sheep that were penned along the walkway. Bleating out, cattle sounds, bird calls. The group of 13 entered the portico. Exchange your coins here for sacrifice, they heard, as they were cursing the merchants screaming out. This is my least favorite part of the temple, Thomas said to Andrew, and I'm making this story up, so work with me. It makes me feel cheated. You know, all those money changers are cheating travelers. Exchange your foreign coin for local coin, they scream out again. Fair rates, we've got them right here. Andrew nodded. It happens to everyone all the time. And the sights and the sounds where men had booths set up along the walls of the portico were selling doves and pigeons and sparrows and small sheep and goats. And there were other men, as Thomas had rightly seen, who were money changers, who took the foreign currency of travelers and gave them the local coinage. Buy 2 doves and get a pigeon for free. Peter and James were looking at a few of the sheep along one wall when a commotion drew their attention. It was Yeshua. He had flipped over a couple of the tables of the money changers. Coins of all types were spilled out all over the floor. And the men were on their hands and knees trying to collect all those coins. And they yelled angrily at Rabbi. The mood of the portico was shifting from a casual excitement to upset and chaotic. And Yeshua flips over his drink. No, he didn't flip over my drink. He flips over another table. I get excited. My hands, I talk with my hands.
All Jews talk.
He flipped over another table, knocked over a drink. It hit the wall. Wow. Pinchas doesn't seem so radical now, does he? Pinchas and Yeshua demonstrate zeal. However, Messiah's greatest act of zeal was not taking life, but giving his own a little later. To Pinchas, he stopped the plague. Yeshua, he bore the plague of sin. We read in Numbers chapter 25, verse 12, "Therefore say, Behold, I give my covenant of peace." And in the Hebrew, that is Briti Shalom, my covenant of peace. Now, this is astonishing. Pinchas, I was thinking about Peter still. Pinchas, he just acted violently. How's this a covenant of peace? Yet God rewards him with peace. Why? Because true peace is not the absence of conflict. True peace is the restoration of divine order. Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, he wrote, "Peace is not the elimination of differences, but the harmonious fulfillment of God's purposes." The Jewish scribes have long noted that the word shalom in this verse contains a broken letter Vav in all Torah scrolls. Ancient commentators discussed this anonymously extensively. Several lessons emerged. Peace in a fallen world is always incomplete, like that Vav. Zeal and peace must always be balanced. And human righteousness is never perfect. Neither is a Vav. Some people viewed the broken Vav as a teaching that peace comes through sacrifice, cutting in two. As Messianic, we naturally see a shadow of our Messiah. The Prince of Peace was himself broken, so covenant peace could be established. But that led me to another thought about the priesthood mentioned in verse 13. "And it shall be for him and his descendants after him a covenant of everlasting priesthood." Now, of course, the Hebrew is Brit Kahunat Olam, an everlasting covenant of priesthood. Now, the priesthood is connected directly to covenant faithfulness. Now, notice, Pinchas receives both peace and priesthood. The priest's role is not merely ritual. The priest stands between God and people. Adonai went on to declare that as a reward for his decisive action, Pinchas would be the clan of Levites that would be the priests. This really didn't change anything. It just clarified something. Pinchas was Eleazar's son, and Eleazar was Aharon's son. Aharon was now dead, we know that, and Eleazar was now high priest. So, one of the sons of Eleazar would naturally become the next high priest. The Lord just decided which son that would be. Pinchas. The Sifri teaches, measure for measure, because he restored peace between Israel and the Father in heaven. He was given a covenant of peace. This reflects a major Torah principle. God rewards according to covenant faithfulness. Yet there is also a Messianic connection. The Aaronic priesthood points beyond itself. Psalm 110 introduces another priesthood. It says there, "You are a priest according to the order of Melchizedek." Now the Brit HaShaar applies this to Yeshua. Yeshua does not abolish the priesthood. He fulfills its ultimate purpose. You see, Pinchas temporarily stood between judgment and Israel, But our Messiah eternally stands between judgment and humanity. So as we come to the end of our double portion, we read that Moshe spoke to the heads of the tribe. Numbers chapter 30, verse 1. Now the Torah now transitioning to vows. So why end here? Because covenant life requires covenant integrity. In other words, words matter. Promises matter. Commitments matter. The rabbis repeatedly emphasize God created through speech. Humans bear His image. Therefore, speech possesses a spiritual significance. The Talmud, it teaches a person's yes should be yes and his no should be no. Well, doesn't that sound also like James chapter 5, verse 12? The words create obligation. Covenant people must be trustworthy. And Yeshua, he taught similarly. Integrity of speech reflects the integrity of your heart, your very thoughts. A disciple's words should carry weight. Has anyone ever stood up to you before? Have you ever stood up to anyone else before? They promised to meet you, but they never came. How about that? You ever stood anybody up? A friend tells you that they're going to come over and they're going to play games for the night. You should look forward to Friday after school. But they never come. Family says that they're coming to visit on next Sunday. So you even prepare some extra food, but they don't even come. I believe that we all have this experience and have probably been bothered by it sometime in our life. So the next time some person arranges something with us, we even have some doubt whether they're going to be, we can even rely on them, right? That's where James, he did say, let your yes be yes and your no be no, so that you may not fall under judgment. What James is talking about here is that we are to keep our word. You say something, do it. James has summarized something that we heard Yeshua teach all the way back in Matthew chapter 5, verses 33 to 37. And I read, again, you have heard that it is said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but keep the oath that you have made to the Lord. But I tell you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is His footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. Simply let your yes be yes and your no be no. That's 3 times in Scripture we see that. Must be important, huh? Both Yeshua and James are talking about oaths, about swearing an oath. God, Yeshua, and Rav Shaul all made oaths. We're called to make oaths before the Lord at times, promising to fulfill our vows to Him. The Ruach, the Holy Spirit, being our helper to help us fulfill those vows that we made to Yeshua when we came to Him and said, you have my life, we will follow you. What the people in James' day were doing were making oaths on a daily basis. And there was a problem with this. First, it meant that they were not taking their vows and their oaths very seriously. See, an oath is a serious matter. In Deuteronomy 6:13, we read, fear the Lord your God, serve Him only, and take oaths in His name. Taking an oath is a serious matter, and what Yeshua says is that when we swear by heaven and earth, we include God in our oath, since they both belong to Him. An oath is raising the stakes of our promise. It is saying that we promise and include something precious in that promise that we show that we're sincere. People say, on my life, or on my mother's grave, or even in the name of God. They'll throw those statements out there like it was candy. When we start making oaths for everything we say, we're taking something reserved for special occasions and making them normal and useless. It's like having Pesach dinner every day. Then when Pesach comes around, well, the meal's not so special anymore. In fact, we might rather have a hamburger for a change. Make it a cheeseburger. We trivialize that which should be important. We desecrate that which is holy. When we evoke God's name or other things that He's given us, we are making God out to be unimportant. And not only that, but when we make God a party to our promise, we involve Him in that promise. And when we do that on a regular basis, sooner or later we're going to break our oath and God becomes part of a broken promise. The Parashat Pinchas, it teaches us that covenant faithfulness requires courage, not anger, not fanaticism, but unwavering loyalty to God, the true covenant peace that comes from our alignment with God's will. And the covenant of peace follows a covenant obedience. Now, I believe that Pinchas foreshadows the ultimate mediatorial work of our Messiah, which in turn leads us to a covenant relationship with the King of Kings. And the covenant requires faithfulness to include commitments and guarding our very words. So what is happening in this parsha is the use of utilitarianism, not as the basis of the moral life in general, but as a way of deciding how best to act in a situation in which there are no clean choices. Whichever way you act, you will be breaking a rule that in ordinarily circumstances you should abide by. You should not stand idly by and do nothing when you could save lives. But you should not cause someone to die by throwing him off a bridge to save him from an oncoming train that you hear off in the distance. Well, maybe. You face a literal sense, a dilemma. That is a choice between two courses of action, both of which are undesirable or ordinarily just plain wrong. That is what is happening in the case of Pinchas. He had a simple choice, either to do nothing and let more people die from the plague, or to act extrajudicially and kill the two key culprits, Zimri and Cosby. Pinchas's act cannot be made the basis of a law because of the unique circumstances in which he did what he did. He did not act on the basis of rule utilitarianism because he was faced with two rules that clashed. So one, do not stand idly by while innocent people die, and the two, do not put an offender to death without properly constituted trial. His behavior was a classic instance of the act of utilitarianism. And the essence of act utilitarianism is that it is about specific situations, not general rules. That is what the sages meant when they called it a case of halakha ve'en morin kin. It is a law that is not taught. You have to be taught to do what is right. Sometimes it's just instinct, right? The truth is that an act like that of Pinchas can only be justified in retrospect. And when it actually does produce the consequences that it was intended to achieve. In praising Pinchas for his courage and his zeal, God ensured that he would never act that way again by making him my covenant of peace. In other words, you did that, but you don't get to do it again. Rare are the circumstances in which Pinchas-like zealotry is justified. And if anyone asks whether he may do so, the answer should always be no. Don't go around killing people that are having adulterous affairs in front of the synagogue doors. Parashat Pinchas begins with judgment, and it ends with covenant order and oaths. And then it moves from plague to peace, from zeal to priesthood, from wilderness to inheritance, from Moshe to Yehoshua, Joshua, from sacrifice to a sacred time, from covenant promises to covenant responsibility. The Jewish sages saw Pinchas as a defender of the covenant. Messianic believers see in this parsha both the faithfulness of Pinchas and the greater fulfillment in Messiah Yeshua. Pinchas turned away wrath for a moment. Messiah provides eternal atonement. Pinchas received a covenant of peace. Yeshua is the Prince of Peace. Pinchas received an everlasting priesthood. Messiah fulfills the ultimate priestly ministry. Therefore, the enduring message of this parsha, I think, is this. God seeks a people who are zealous for holiness, faithful to the covenant, committed to inheritance, devoted to sacred times, and anchored in the peace that comes only through our Messiah. And when reflecting on this portion, we see God's heart for justice, zeal, and integrity. The covenant with Pinchas, the census for a new generation, and the legislation of vows all point to a deeper relationship with God, grounded in His promises, His faithful promises, and our responsive obedience. Or at least it should be. So I conclude with, how will you align your zeal, your integrity, and your pursuit of justice with God's covenantal love this week and every week? I say, may it be according to God's Word.